Shabbat Shalom again. Feels like it's been so long. All right, so this one may be a little short. It'll go along with my attention span for the week, I think. Let's see. So we gathered this week for Sukkot, also known as the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of Dwellings, also known as the Feast of Booths. Any other names, Dennis? Is that it? Is that covered? Okay. So I've got a lot of names for it, but basically it is a time commemorating that 40 years when the Israelites dwelt in booths, tabernacles, dwellings, sukkahs, if you will. And as we sit now, I'll just tell you, if you've camped out with us already, you know that they're not usually very warm. At least a tent is not. And I doubt that sukkah that we've got out there is very warm either, even though it is piled up with stuff, because it's missing a whole front. So not very warm. And if you've ever done much camping, anytime you start getting that light drizzle, you just pray to God. You say, God, please don't allow it to rain us out and start leaking through this tent. And then if it gets a little heavier and starts storming, you say, God, please don't allow this tent to be struck by lightning while we are in it. And beyond that, you just say, Lord, we're getting out of this tent because it's about to blow away. Right. So it is fragile. It is not permanent. And that's part of his point. So as you sit in these fragile shelters, these sukkahs, we're reminded heartily of our dependence on God and his constant presence in our lives. These themes are echoed in both. So I had a little different Torah portion than Dennis, but they're echoed in the Torah and Haftorah portions this week. The Torah portion that I looked at, I did have both, but the Torah portion I looked at was in Exodus. And we see Moses, we open up to Moses having a deep conversation with God, and he's pleading for God to continually lead them, for God's presence to continually be with the people of Israel. He says, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. That's Exodus 33:15. And he says, I think it's shortly after that, he says, basically he's saying, we don't want to be like the other nations whose gods are not present with them. We don't want to look like them. How else will they know that we're yours unless you're with us? So God reassures Moses by declaring, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest in the sukkah. So this dialogue underscores a central truth for us, that without God's presence, there's no true direction or peace. In the wilderness, the Israelites were completely reliant on God for guidance. You remember pillar of cloud, pillar of fire. They relied on him completely for provision. The manna that they ate, and for protection. I mean, they're on the move. For 40 years, they're pretty much on the move. No time for fortifications. Again, they're dwelling in tents as well as carrying a very large tent that the presence of the Lord dwelt in while he was there with them. And so they don't have much time for protection. They're not digging foxholes. They're not putting up walls and other fortifications. They're completely reliant on God for protection. So just as they dwelled in temporary shelters, vulnerable yet under God's care, we too are reminded during Sukkot that in our frailty, God is our ultimate shelter. He is our covering. He covers over us. And we're reminded of that again through all the feasts from Pesach through next Thursday when we conclude Sukkot. So as Moses continues to intercede, we see God revealing his divine name and character. And this is one of my favorite parts when he tells it, and just again, that dialogue that he has with Moshe during that time, because he's telling Moshe, hey, you can't see me, but what I will do, I'll pronounce my name for you. That struck me. It struck me different this year reading that. I don't know why. But he says, I'll pronounce it for you, because that's one of the things as Messianics, when we sit downstairs on Saturdays sometimes, we talk about those kinds of things. Like, well, is it this way or is it that way? Where's the emphasis? And how do we say that? And God said, hey, I'm going to clear this up for you. I'm going to tell you about that. He says, I can't show you myself. You can't see me. You can't look on me. But what I will do is I'll hide you in the cleft of the rock. And as my presence goes by, it's there. You'll feel that. You'll see me in that way. Oh my gosh, I lost my place. There it is. Okay. So he says he'll reveal his divine name and character. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. This revelation is at the heart of our covenant relationship with God. So it speaks of his boundless mercy, his grace, even after Israel failed with keeping up. I mean, they couldn't even wait till Moshe got down from the mountain and they were making a golden calf. So they'd already failed before he ever got down. So even in the light of that, God renews his covenant, demonstrating that he does not abandon his people, no matter their past, their ignorance, their stupidity, and their willfulness, and their willingness to step aside from the path that he set before them. And then as we look in the Haftorah, we see the prophetic vision of Ezekiel, where God promises to protect Israel in the final battle against Gog and Magog. So this vision speaks to God's ultimate sovereignty over all the nations and his role as Israel's protector again. So in this, God declares that he will be known as the Holy One of Israel, and that the nations will recognize his power when he delivers his people. So we see a forward-looking aspect of Sukkot. So while we celebrate God's past provision during the wilderness, during that 40 years in the wilderness, we also anticipate a future where God will bring ultimate peace and security. And every year at this time, I start thinking about that. Like, what's that going to look like? When we start off, when Kevin blows that trumpet at Yom Teruah, and you think, because whether you grew up without religion at all, whether you grew up Christian or whatever, you've probably heard, that saying about when the trumpet sounds. That was just something that we grew up with. And it wasn't until we started this walk that I really kind of started to see the beauty in what that is and what it signifies. And it's not just, as I'm trying to put it all together in my head, it's not just that it happens at that time on that day. The trumpet sounds and then everything unfolds. I think it probably will happen this way when it comes to fruition, when we actually hear it from the heavenly host. I think it'll be that time, and then we'll have a few days to reflect and to think about it before atonement begins. And then after that, we'll have a few more days before he comes to dwell with us. And then, so Simchat Torah even takes on a profound meaning as we think, hey, that is when it has all been accomplished and we're there. We will dance with that word, with our God, and be in him forever. I lost my place again. I go with. So yeah, we'll see forward looking. So while we celebrate, yeah, I said that. So God will bring ultimate peace and security. Ezekiel's prophecy assures us that God's presence will ultimately defeat all enemies and restore his people to peace and safety. Just as the sukkah symbolizes both vulnerability and protection, a little bit of protection, Ezekiel reminds us of God's promise to shelter us in times of trial. So what are some lessons that we learn? As we sit in our sukkahs this week, we reflect on the temporary nature not only of those sukkahs, but of our lives. They're very fleeting. And the eternal nature of God's care, which is exactly opposite. The sukkah is fragile, much like life itself, yet in its fragility, it teaches us about trusting God. Sukkot's a time of joy, but also of humility, recognizing that our true security comes from what we build with our, not from what we build with our hands, but from the one who sustains us. And again, I just reminded these past weeks of the storms that happened up along the East Coast and all the damage and things. And if you look at those places, I mean, you look at that, and we look around us every day, and we know we're in Tornado Alley down here. We look around and we think, hey, we're pretty secure in these brick houses, much more so than in these tents. But it can be taken away so quickly, so fast. Back in 2010, Courtney, I think it was 2010 when the earthquakes in Haiti happened, and it destroyed so much of that island. So many people were affected and devastated. One of the things that kept me in awe was the fact that as they were going down, because they went, I mean, for years after that, people were going down to do relief efforts and things like that. And there's a lot of good stories associated with this, but there are a lot of half buildings, some because the earthquake shook them down, and some because well-meaning aid folks providing aid came and built half shelters that were never finished and things like that. One of the things that really stuck out was the fact that even the ones that were completed, the ones that they got down there and they finished, the Haitian people wouldn't live in them because they were scared to death that they were going to fall on, because so many of the people that they knew were crushed in those. And so they would rather have lived in the tents. I mean, they still had tents up for years after that. They may still have tents up, and they lived in those because you're less likely to die if that tent falls on you. You know, and so, you know, it's just, again, the fragility, you know, the impermanence of those things is just a reminder of how frail we are. I lost my place again. But it teaches about trusting God. So Sukkot is a time of joy. It's also a time of humility, recognizing that our true security comes from not what we build with our hands, but the one who sustains us. God's presence. Just as Moses pleaded for God's presence, we too should seek God's guidance in our lives. When we face uncertainty, let us remember that God's presence brings us peace and direction. God's provision. Sukkot's also a harvest festival. I'm pointing at pumpkins. Celebrating God's provision. It reminds us to be grateful for the abundance that we receive, but also to trust him in times of scarcity. And isn't that easy when we are truly blessed with abundance? Isn't it easy to trust? Hey, sometimes we don't even think about him, I think. But when times get rough and you're scraping by, you tend to rely on him a lot more, right? God's protection. Just as Ezekiel's vision assures us of God's ultimate protection, We can trust that God is watching over us in all circumstances, even when the world seems unstable. So as we celebrate Sukkot, let's dwell not just on the physical sukkah, but in the spiritual truth it represents. God is our shelter. God is our provider. God is our protector. And in every season of life, whether we face joy or hardship, may we remember his enduring presence with us, and may we respond with trust, gratitude, and joy. Hag Sameach.
Amen. Amen.